Have you ever wondered how a child, born innocent, could grow into a monster feared by society? Not all killers are born with blood on their hands. Many begin their lives like anyone else, fragile, curious, and desperate for love. But when that love is replaced by cruelty, when affection is drowned out by screams, and when a child's trust is shattered again and again, something inside them begins to wither. This is the story of childhood trauma, silent, hidden, and corrosive. The kind of pain that doesn't fade but instead festers in the deepest corners of the mind, reshaping it into something dark and unrecognizable. Imagine a child left alone in a dim, filthy room. The air smells of stale alcohol. Outside the door, voices shout, glass shatters, fists strike flesh. The child curls into the corner, clutching a torn blanket, too terrified to cry, because crying only brings more pain. For many, this is just one bad night. But for others, this is every night of their childhood. Psychologists have long studied the effects of such environments. Chronic neglect, emotional abuse, or physical violence wires the brain differently. A child constantly exposed to fear and unpredictability begins to see the world not as a place of love and safety, but as a battlefield. Trust dies early, replaced with suspicion, anger, and a hunger for control. Let us not forget, some of the world's most infamous criminals share eerily similar beginnings. Ted Bundy, abandoned by his father, raised in secrecy and lies. Eileen Wuornos, beaten, sexually assaulted, and left homeless before she was even a teenager. Ed Kemper, tormented by his domineering mother who locked him away in a basement. These names send shivers down our spines, but behind their monstrous acts were once children, living through terrors they could not escape. It doesn't excuse their crimes, but it does offer a chilling insight. Trauma doesn't vanish, it transforms. Now, think about the fragile mind of a child. At just 5 years old, the brain is still forming pathways of empathy, trust, and morality. Abuse during these years isn't just painful, it rewires the very architecture of the brain. The amygdala, which governs fear, becomes hyperactive. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for impulse control, grows weaker. In other words, a child soaked in violence may learn to see violence as the only language they understand. But there's something even more unsettling. Not every abused child becomes a criminal. Most survive. Many heal. So what makes one child a victim, and another, a predator? The answer lies in the silence. The silence of an ignored cry. The silence of a locked room. The silence of adults who look away. This silence teaches the child a dangerous lesson, that they do not matter, that love is a lie, that pain is the only constant. And slowly, beneath that silence, anger builds. Anger that has no safe release. Anger that begins to whisper dark promises of power, control, and revenge. And while these wounds remain unseen to the outside world, they shape everything that follows. Some children will channel the pain into survival. Others, into destruction. But all carry the scars of those early years. Childhood trauma doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. In broken toys, in sleepless nights, in the way a child stares at nothing for too long. These shadows of innocence linger, waiting, shaping. And eventually, some of those shadows will grow teeth. But when does the pain of yesterday transform into the rage of tomorrow? When does the wounded child begin to dream of becoming the predator? That moment is where the real horror begins. Every monster has a beginning. And often, that beginning isn't the first crime, it's the first fantasy. When a child grows up drowning in fear and humiliation, something inside them eventually shifts. They may start as a victim, powerless and terrified. But the human mind is resourceful. It seeks escape, sometimes in the darkest of places. And when the real world offers no safety, the imagination becomes both a refuge and a weapon. Picture a boy, no older than 10, beaten for mistakes he never made. His cries go unheard, his pleas dismissed. He cannot fight back, his abuser is bigger, stronger, untouchable. But in his mind, he creates a secret world. A place where he is no longer weak. In that world, he's in control. He envisions punishing those who hurt him, flipping the balance of power. What begins as daydreams of revenge slowly mutates. Over time, These thoughts become more vivid, more violent, and eventually, more pleasurable. This is how rage germinates inside the mind of a child. Not suddenly, but slowly, like poison seeping into water. Psychologists call this the cycle of violence. Victims of abuse often internalize two roles, the powerless victim and the powerful aggressor. For some, that aggression is turned inward, leading to self-destruction, addiction, depression, even suicide. But for others, the aggression turns outward, searching for a target. And here lies the terrifying truth. Many future killers begin practicing their rage long before their first human victim. The neighborhood pet that mysteriously vanishes. The stray cat that never comes back. The dog that flinches whenever the child approaches. These are not random acts of cruelty, they are rehearsals. Small experiments in power, control, and domination. Consider Albert DeSalvo, later known as the Boston Strangler. As a boy, he tortured animals and committed petty crimes, long before he escalated to killing women. Or Jeffrey Dahmer, who collected roadkill and dissected animals as a child, fascinated with the line between life and death. For them, cruelty became both an outlet and a rehearsal. A rehearsal for the dark acts they would one day commit against people. But let us pause for a chilling question. Why does rage become addictive? The answer is control. Children of trauma grow up in chaos, in environments where they have no voice. But the moment they cause pain, whether to an animal, a sibling, or even themselves, they feel something they have never felt before: power. That first taste of control is intoxicating. And like any addiction, the hunger grows. Small acts of cruelty no longer satisfy. Fantasies of revenge evolve into fantasies of killing. And soon, the line between thought and action begins to blur. Yet the rage is often invisible to the outside world. These children may smile in public, go to school, play with friends. Teachers see a quiet student. Neighbors see a polite boy. No one sees the storm boiling beneath the surface. The mask of normalcy is already forming, long before the first crime. But when does the mask slip? When does fantasy cross into reality? It happens at the breaking point. The moment when pain, anger, and fantasy converge. And the child, now older, finally decides to stop imagining and start doing. The monsters in the making are already here, hidden in plain sight. They are not born, they are carved out of pain, sharpened by rage, and fed by silence. And soon, they will step out of their fantasies, and into reality. But when they do, they rarely arrive as monsters. They arrive wearing masks. And that is where our story turns next. What is more terrifying than a killer who lurks in the shadows? A killer who looks just like everyone else. This is one of the most chilling truths about criminal psychology. The most dangerous predators don't look like predators at all. They look like neighbors, classmates, co-workers. They blend in so seamlessly that no one suspects the storm of darkness beneath their calm exterior. This mask of normalcy is not accidental. It is crafted, built carefully over years of practice. And it is the mask that allows killers to move among us, unseen. Many who endured trauma as children learn an essential survival skill: concealment. Crying out for help didn't work. Showing pain only invited more punishment. So they learned to hide it. They forced smiles when they were broken inside. They laughed when they wanted to scream. They pretended to be normal, because pretending was the only way to survive. Over time, the pretense becomes second nature. The mask fuses with the face. And the world never sees what lurks beneath. Consider Ted Bundy. Handsome. Charismatic. Intelligent. Women described him as charming, even polite. He worked on political campaigns, volunteered for suicide hotlines, shook hands with police officers who never suspected the truth. Yet behind that warm smile was a man who lured, trapped, and murdered countless women. Or John Wayne Gacy. To neighbors, he was a helpful contractor, a man who dressed as a clown for children's parties, the guy you'd never suspect. But beneath that costume was a sadistic killer who buried bodies beneath his very own home. They were predators in disguise. And the mask was their greatest weapon. But why the mask? Because killers understand something instinctively: trust is power. The neighbor who helps carry your groceries, the coworker who cracks harmless jokes, the man who offers a ride to a stranger, these faces don't inspire fear. They inspire comfort. And comfort lowers defenses. Behind that comfort lies the trap. The criminal mind thrives on duality. By day, they can be family men, students, or professionals. By night, they can be hunters. This double life not only protects them from suspicion, it feeds their ego. They revel in the deception, knowing they've fooled everyone. Psychologists describe this as compartmentalization, the ability to divide one's life into separate boxes. Box 1, the respectable citizen. Box 2, the secret predator. And the walls between these boxes are carefully guarded. That's why many killers seem eerily calm even after committing unspeakable acts. Their mask doesn't slip. At least, not yet. But masks are fragile things. They crack under pressure. Sometimes, a small mistake, a forgotten clue, a nervous slip, an impulsive act, tears the mask away. And when it breaks, the world sees the monster for the first time. Think about it. How many times have we heard the words, "But he seemed so normal"? A phrase spoken by neighbors, friends, even family members of serial killers after their crimes are exposed. Normalcy, in these cases, is not truth. It is camouflage. And that camouflage works until it doesn't. Because beneath the charm, beneath the smile, beneath the illusion, the rage and fantasies are still there. And eventually, they demand release. The mask protects the predator. But the mask also delays the inevitable. For every killer, there comes a first time. A moment when they cannot resist the hunger any longer. A moment when they take off the mask and reveal their true face. That moment is the breaking point. And once they cross it, there is no going back. Every predator has a beginning. And in the world of killers, that beginning is marked by a first act of violence against another human being. It does not happen suddenly. It builds, like thunder gathering before a storm. Fantasies intensify. The hunger grows unbearable. The mask strains under the weight of hidden desires. And then, one day, the dam breaks. This moment, the breaking point, is where imagination ends and reality begins. It is where the criminal mind transforms from dreamer to door. For some, this first act seems almost impulsive. A sudden explosion of rage, triggered by humiliation, rejection, or confrontation. A spark that ignites years of suppressed fury. Take Eileen Wuornos. Her life was steeped in abandonment and abuse. But her first murder came during an argument with a client, when she pulled the trigger. To her, it was framed as self-defense. But for investigators, it was the moment she crossed an invisible line, a line she would never return from. For others, the first act is planned meticulously, rehearsed over and over in their minds until reality can no longer wait. Dennis Rader, known as BTK, spent years developing elaborate fantasies before striking his first victims, the Otero family, in 1974. His need for control and domination exploded in that moment, leaving behind the aftermath of horror and the beginning of his dark legacy. But what makes this first act so dangerous is not the crime itself, it's the effect it has on the killer. The fantasies they've nursed for years suddenly take shape in flesh and blood. The adrenaline surges. The sense of control is intoxicating. The silence after the act is deafening, but instead of guilt, many feel relief. Relief, because the hunger was fed. Excitement, because the fantasy was real. And beneath it all, curiosity. What would it feel like to do it again? This is the moment psychologists call the point of no return. After the first act of killing, the criminal mind is forever changed. The barrier between thought and action is destroyed. What was once unthinkable has now been done, and if it was done once, it can be done again. For some, that first crime is messy, chaotic, filled with mistakes. Yet even through panic, the seed is planted. They may vow to never do it again, but the memory lingers. And like an itch beneath the skin, the desire always returns. Stronger. Louder. What is chilling is how ordinary the killer may appear afterward. The very next day, they might go to work, eat dinner with family, laugh at a joke on television. But inside, They carry a secret. They know something no one else knows. Something forbidden, terrifying, and addictive. The secret is power. The power over life and death. And once they've tasted it, they crave more. It's easy to believe that the first murder would consume them with guilt. And sometimes, it does. But guilt fades. Fear fades. Hunger does not. The breaking point is like a door. On one side stands the person they once were, the child of trauma, the teenager of fantasies. On the other side waits the predator. Once the door is opened, it cannot be closed. And with each step through that door, the monster grows stronger. But what happens next is perhaps even more disturbing. The first kill may be chaotic, even clumsy. But the second, the third, they become cleaner. More deliberate. More ritualistic. Because soon, the act itself is not enough. The killer begins to crave something deeper. Not just blood, but ritual. Not just murder, but meaning. And that is where the descent grows darker still. The first act of violence is a storm. Chaotic. Messy. Driven by impulse. But for many killers, the chaos cannot last. Chaos leaves mistakes. Mistakes leave clues. And above all, it does not satisfy the hunger for long. To feed their need, they begin to create order. Patterns. Rules. Rituals. This is where the criminal mind transforms yet again. No longer just a predator of opportunity, they become predators of design. Every move, every detail, every ritual is carefully chosen, not merely to kill, but to control. Why rituals? Because rituals are about power. For a child who once lived in fear, powerless against abuse and neglect, rituals restore what was stolen from them. They control the when, the where, and the how of every act. They control their victims, their surroundings, and ultimately, the narrative of their own darkness. This control is intoxicating. And like a drug, it demands repetition. Take Jeffrey Dahmer. His crimes were not just killings, they were rituals of possession. He kept trophies, bones, even attempted to create living mannequins from his victims. It wasn't only about death. It was about control, about ensuring no one could ever leave him again. Or Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. His ritual was domination. Binding, torturing, and then killing. Each step deliberate, each step rehearsed, each step feeding his obsession with power. Then there's Edmund Kemper, who returned to his victims after death, replaying his fantasies in a grotesque loop of ritualistic behavior. Each killer had their own ritual. Each ritual fed a different hunger. But the psychology is hauntingly similar. Rituals give meaning to the act. They transform murder from violence into ceremony. And within that ceremony, killers find something beyond thrill: identity. They are no longer the powerless child. No longer the victim of abuse. In their ritual, they are gods of their own creation. Deciding who lives, who dies, and how it happens. And then there are the trophies. The keepsakes. The items stolen from victims: jewelry, clothing, photographs, even body parts. To outsiders, these are evidence. But to the killer, they are reminders. Tokens of victory. Objects that allow them to relive the moment whenever they choose. Each trophy whispers a memory, each memory reignites the fantasy. It is not enough to kill. They must remember. They must feel it again. And so the cycle continues, deepening with every act. What is most chilling is that rituals are not random. They are signatures. They tell us not just how a killer operates, but who they are inside. The choice of weapon, the method of killing, the treatment of the body, the taking of trophies, each detail is a reflection of their psychology, their trauma, their deepest desires. And over time, the ritual becomes more important than the act itself. The killing is almost secondary. The ritual is the true fulfillment. But there's a danger in rituals, too. The more complex they become, the harder they are to hide. Patterns emerge. Signatures are recognized. And eventually, investigators begin to connect the dots. The very thing that gives the killer satisfaction also betrays them. Still, until that moment comes, the rituals grow darker, stranger, more elaborate. The hunger deepens. The obsession consumes them. And the mask of normalcy they once wore so easily begins to crack under the weight of their compulsions. Because no matter how careful, no matter how clever, patterns always leave a trail. And following that trail is how the world finally unmasks a predator. But before that happens, something else emerges. Something even more haunting than rituals or trophies. The recognition that beneath the chaos, there is always a pattern. Evil rarely acts at random. To the outside world, serial killings may look like chaos, like madness without reason. But beneath the horror, there is almost always a pattern, a rhythm to the violence, a psychological fingerprint left behind in the wreckage. This is how the criminal mind betrays itself. Investigators have long known that killers rarely choose their victims by chance. There is a method to the madness. Some hunt those who resemble people from their past, the abuser they hated, the parent who tormented them, the lover who rejected them. Others seek out the vulnerable, the lonely, the weak, the ones least likely to fight back. And this is where profiling begins. The recognition that behavior is not random. That a killer's choices, rituals, and even their mistakes reflect who they are. Consider Ted Bundy again. His victims were not chosen blindly. Nearly all were young women, many with long dark hair parted down the middle, uncannily similar to a woman who once broke his heart. Bundy wasn't just killing women. He was killing her, over and over again, in a twisted loop of revenge and obsession. Or Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. His killings were marked by sadism and ritualistic brutality. Yet even in his chaos, a pattern emerged. His attacks took place late at night, when fear itself seemed to amplify his presence. Then there was Jack the Ripper, the shadowy figure who haunted Victorian London. His victims were women of the streets, chosen deliberately, their bodies mutilated with surgical precision. Over a century later, his pattern still chills investigators, not only who he chose, but how he wanted the world to see his work. Patterns reveal more than just targets. They reveal motive. A killer obsessed with control will bind, restrain, and manipulate. A killer consumed by rage will attack with sudden violence, leaving chaos in his wake. A killer seeking intimacy will linger with the body long after death. Every detail tells a story. And when woven together, those details expose the predator hiding behind the mask. But here lies the paradox. Killers crave patterns because patterns give them satisfaction, meaning, and identity. Yet those same patterns make them vulnerable. The way a body is positioned. The type of victim chosen. The trophies taken, or left behind. These breadcrumbs, however small, form a trail that investigators follow. It is the killer's arrogance, the belief that they are untouchable, that often leads to their downfall. They repeat the ritual because they must. And in repetition, they reveal themselves. Still, we must ask, why repeat the same behavior, knowing it risks exposure? The answer is chilling. Because the pattern is not just choice, it is compulsion. The ritual is not just preference, it is obsession. The killer is not in control of the pattern. The pattern controls the killer. And no matter how careful, no matter how clever, the pattern always deepens. Always escalates. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit once described this progression as a spiral. A killer begins with fantasy, then acts, then ritual. But with each act, the spiral tightens. The hunger grows. The need for control intensifies. And soon, even the most disciplined predator begins making mistakes. Mistakes that break the mask. Mistakes that expose the truth. The unmasking of a criminal mind is rarely sudden. It comes slowly, piece by piece, like light seeping into a darkened room. Investigators notice the pattern. Journalists report the details. The world begins to whisper, there is someone out there. And for the first time, the predator realizes they are being hunted, too. But here is the question that haunts us most. When the mask finally falls, when the predator is unmasked, what do we see? Do we see a monster? Or do we see the broken child, hiding somewhere deep inside the monster's eyes? That question leads us to the most unsettling debate of all. When the handcuffs finally click shut, when the mask has been torn away, and the world stares into the face of a killer, the final question always lingers. Were they born this way, or made this way? It is the debate that has haunted psychology, criminology, and philosophy for decades. The debate of nature versus nurture. On one side stands the argument of biology. Some researchers believe certain people are born with differences in their brain chemistry, lower activity in the prefrontal cortex, higher activity in the amygdala, traits that may predispose them to aggression, lack of empathy, and impulsive violence. In this view, the seeds of darkness are planted before birth, woven into DNA. On the other side is nurture. The belief that trauma, abuse, neglect, and violence sculpt a child's mind into something fractured, breeding rage and obsession. That monsters are not born, but created one scar at a time. And then, there is the third possibility. Perhaps it is not one, but both. Consider the case of Richard Kuklinski, the Iceman. He grew up under the fist of an abusive father and the cold neglect of his mother. Yet psychologists who studied him later suggested his lack of empathy and extreme detachment went beyond trauma, it felt hardwired. Or take Jeffrey Dahmer. His childhood, while troubled, did not feature the severe abuse others endured. Yet his fantasies, his obsessions, his compulsion to dominate and consume went far beyond ordinary deviance. These examples blur the line. Trauma may sharpen the blade, but perhaps biology forged the steel long before. The chilling truth is this: not every abused child becomes a killer. Millions endure trauma and never harm a soul. And not every killer had a violent childhood. Some come from stable homes, loving parents, even privilege. So what, then, tips the scale? The uncomfortable answer is that no one truly knows. Psychology can trace the scars. Neuroscience can map the brain. Criminology can follow the patterns. But the final answer, the exact formula of what makes a killer, remains hidden, as if locked behind a door we cannot open. And perhaps, that is what makes it so terrifying. Because if killers are born, then evil is written into the human blueprint. And if killers are made, then any child abandoned, neglected, or brutalized could be shaped into one. Either answer is unsettling. It forces us to look at the world differently. At the quiet child sitting alone at lunch. At the neighbor who always smiles a little too politely. At the hidden scars in people we pass every day. It whispers a chilling possibility, that behind any ordinary face, there may lurk a shadow we cannot see. So we return to the question. Nature, nurture, or nightmare? Perhaps the truth is not one or the other, but the collision of both. A child born with fragile wiring, placed in the wrong environment, abandoned to trauma, and starved of love, what grows from that soil may not be a person at all, but a predator. And yet, the debate will never end. Because to end it would mean confronting the darkest truth of all, that evil may not be an accident. That evil may not be a destiny. That evil may simply be part of us. As you listen to these words, ask yourself, are monsters truly rare? Or are they simply hidden, walking among us, smiling, laughing, pretending until the mask slips, and we see what was there all along? That answer may never come. And maybe it's better that way. Because sometimes, the scariest questions are the ones that can never be